Welcome. Tonight, we're pleased to have you join us for the top 5 AI trends. My name is Carmen Wright, and it's my pleasure and honor to be serving as the IABC-BC chapter president this year. We'll start with welcome and introductions, and then our panelists will share their insights on some of the hot topics around AI. We encourage your questions during the panel discussion, and we'll also have time at the end of the session for a Q&A. We've set this up as a Zoom meeting format. As your panelists tonight are interested in making this a very human interactive session. As we open up the discussion, you'll have an opportunity to use the reactions to raise your hand to ask a question. And once your name is called, you can unmute yourself to ask the questions to one or more of our panelists. You're also welcome to submit your questions via the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that. And of course, unless you're invited to speak, we ask that you're considerate and respectful to everyone attending and presenting today and remain muted. Seeing your faces on camera is wonderful, but we understand if you choose to turn your camera off. And should you experience any technical difficulties, please send a chat message in the chat box. We have Jose Vargas and Mona Lee behind the scenes to help facilitate your questions, and they are also able to help with technical support. And just a heads up, be on the lookout for a post-event survey after the end of the session, and we're very interested in your feedback and any ideas you have for future sessions. Okay, still people are trickling in. That's excellent turnout tonight. All right, so I think we'll get things started. I'd just like to take a moment and I don't know, maybe we can move on to the next slide. Perfect. So I think I've already done some of this. Just to give you a heads up, this is kind of the topics where we've preliminary done some groupings around topics, but as mentioned, we're hoping that the conversation is organic. So while we hope to touch on all of these and plan to, we'll also go with the flow of the conversation from participants tonight. And then on to the next slide. All righty. So to begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm fortunate to live in the unceded territories of the Coquitlam First Nation, a beautiful and inspiring territory. IABC-BC respectfully acknowledges the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Coquitlam, Quequot, Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, and Tawasan people on whose unceded traditional territories our panel is presenting on today. Next slide. We would also like to acknowledge our generous sponsors who provide creative services, meeting space, and funding to support our local chapter and our initiatives and programming. Graphically Speaking, Earnscliffe Strategies, SFU and the SFU's Beedie School of Business, Envisionation Photography, 6 Degrees Media Production, and Intranet Communications. All righty, so let's get things rolling. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Laura Nastasa, our co-director events for the IABC-BC chapter. Since first meeting Laura this past summer, she's been passionate about bringing together a panel of AI experts, a local panel that on top of all of that to help us as communicators. And based on the turnout tonight, we're topping 36, I can see now, which is awesome. We had about 60 registered, so this is a great turnout. But based on the turnout tonight, obviously I'm not the only one excited to see this come together tonight. And so Laura, as our moderator, I'll now pass things over to you.
Thank you, Carmen. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. As Carmen said, I'm Laura Nastasa. I am the Principal of LN Strategies and the Director of Events and Professional Development here at IABC-BC. As Carmen mentioned, I've got a very strong interest in AI and mixed reality areas, especially in the areas of physical and virtual convergence in communication and stakeholder engagement. This is one of the hottest topics out there right now. And so I'm very, very pleased to welcome SFU Beedie's Terri Griffith and UBC Computer Sciences Schwartz and Mark Schmidt here tonight to discuss the top 5 AI trends. To get things going, can each of you please take a few moments to introduce yourselves and your background and your interests? I guess maybe Terri, do you want to start?
All right, I'm happy to. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with your community. I'm Terri Griffith. I hold the Keith Beedie Chair in Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Simon Fraser University's Beedie School of Business, where I teach in our Management of Technology program, and I teach the Innovation Core. And long ago, I was a coder, and then I moved on to kind of studying how people come to understand and use new technologies in their work. And so, as you might guess, I've been very busy these last few weeks trying to keep up with all the new tools that we have available. Looking forward to the conversation.
Mark, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Mark. Thanks everyone for coming to listen. I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. I got my first AI job in 2003. I've worked for a bunch of different companies, and I'm now a professor at UBC working in this area.
And Vered?
Thanks, Laura. I'm Vered Schwartz. I'm an assistant professor at UBC and CIFAR AI chair at the Vector Institute. I work on natural language processing, which in simple words, I'm teaching machines to understand human language and to be able to converse with us in human level language understanding.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being here tonight. This promises to be a very insightful and interactive discussion. To our audience, again, we'd like this to be interactive. So if you've got any questions or comments, please type them into the chat, and we will check in with you periodically throughout the presentation. During the latter half of the discussion, we're also going to open it up and have general discussion and questions with the panel as well. So to begin with, to our panel, AI is a huge and very, very timely topic. And the term is bantered around a lot and has been front and center in the media, particularly in the last weeks. Can each of you please define from your perspective what AI is today and put it into the context of the greater IT industry? You know, is AI becoming ubiquitous today? I guess maybe, Mark, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So traditionally, AI has just been the study, starting in computer science, but now it's studying in many areas of getting computers or machines in general that can do logic, that can learn from data, from their experiences, that can plan, and doing other things we sort of think of as intelligence. So this has evolved over the years from things like computers playing chess when I was a teenager to now computers sort of chatting with you or recognizing faces in pictures and things like that. In terms of the wider IT industry, you know, many people may not have noticed it, but it's really came about 20 years ago when Google started using machine learning for like a lot of different things. And so for a long time, a big thing has been saying, if it's too hard to code yourself, you should try and use machine learning, which is a special subset of AI, to try and solve your tasks. So in industry, machine learning has actually been used for quite a while, and that started with the internet generating tons and tons of data that could let these things do kind of interesting things.
Well, and that's a really interesting point, Mark, because one of the things that seems to be happening is that we're even getting more and more opportunities not to even worry about coding. There's more and more about non-code. How does that work?
I mean, my friends who are engineers are using a tool called Copilot, which does a lot of coding for you. It's not perfect. It makes frequent mistakes, but it'll do like 85% of your job. And then you just need to do the 15%. And now you can do a whole lot more. And so they just think this is the greatest thing ever, to be honest.
Yeah. Interesting. Terri, Vered, does either of you have any additional comments you want to make on that point?
Yeah, I can maybe focusing specifically on the language part. Maybe I can add that traditionally natural language processing was a bottom-up approach from linguistics, where we would try to analyze the language using linguistic knowledge, and then build on top of that to build systems that can both understand natural language input from the users, as well as generate a natural language response. And today, or in the last decade or even more, machine learning has been the dominant paradigm, where you don't actually need to know a lot about the domain. You just need a lot of data. For text data, it's not a problem. You can just use the whole web. The powerful algorithms and computing power that we have today to just train the models to learn from a lot of examples, and most of AI today is basically, AI became a synonym for machine learning, or maybe vice versa. So it's all at least all the subfields that I know well in AI are pretty much dominated by machine learning.
That's interesting. Now, how about Terri? Any comments about what that means in the world of business?
I'm just going to add kind of a contextual piece that all of us are using it right now because we're on Zoom. You know, the reason why we look decent is because of different settings that are applying these technologies behind the screen. If you had to drive today and used any kind of a traffic app, you were using it then. So in the background, where the professionals are using it, we're dealing with it all the time, whether or not we're thinking about it. And I think the thing that's happened since, you know, November, and for some folks who were early adopters a little bit before November, is that some of the chatbot tools have become far easier to use, or the group of generative AI, those that you give a prompt to and then they generate something back to you. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in much deeper detail.
Well, actually, and that is our first, I guess, kind of to put for our audience into perspective, this is such a huge topic. We've narrowed down today's discussion to 5 points. Natural language processing, generative AI, that's the first one. Ethics and privacy, that's the second one. Crafting your work and expertise, that's the third one. Hype or snake oil salesman and fakes, which is the fourth one. And then the fifth one, which is about accountability and human versus machine. And I think this is, you know, a perfect segue to our first topic, which is natural language processing and generative AI. And I guess maybe, Brad, and this is your specialty. Can you talk us a little bit more about what exactly does natural language processing actually refer to? I mean, it's a big word, and it sounds very interesting, but what is it? What exactly is it?
So natural language processing, or NLP, is concerned with any software built to interact with people in natural languages such as English. So instead of the user typing commands into the software or clicking on something, they can just instruct the software or ask questions in natural language and get responses in natural language. And it's already ubiquitous in our everyday life. So translation, automatic translation like Google Translate, search engines are in one way or another using AI. Some of the Google, for example, if you look for a specific question that it has the answer for, it doesn't just show you the search results, it would also show you a box with the answer and some snippet from the web with evidence for that. There are other systems that are used in the industry. For example, sentiment analysis is used to analyze the various things, like, for example, the users, the extent that users like a certain product or service by the company. Summarization is also used to summarize large text collections to get a concise answer. It's something we use very frequently, and obviously I'm sure everyone in the audience heard about ChatGPT, so that's also part of NLP, and that's one example for generative AI, where this is a software that generates text that looks human-like.
So just for clarity, input variables, can they be voice, text, images? Is there issues like tone of voice and punctuation? And are we there with those things yet? Or is it really more just basic text and some basic voice, you know?
So there is some separation for some reason from the speech processing community to the natural language processing community. In the natural language processing community, we mostly work on text. So if we wanted to work with speech data, we would usually just transcribe it first with some off-the-shelf tools for text-to-speech, speech to text. There is some work directly from the speech, and you're right that there's different intonation and stress that could convey some meaning in addition to just the text. But that's there's less work on that, but those tools exist.
So semantics really aren't there right now. It's not really, the computer wouldn't be able to tell the difference if you have a different tone of voice or a different punctuation, or could it?
There might be advanced work on that in the speech community that I'm not aware of, but there's some disconnect. There's not a lot of work that combines both the meaning in the text and the processing of the audio itself. I think it's probably coming because the more we solve the lower level tasks, the more we advance to solve the harder things. But one thing about audio that makes it difficult, I'm actually not sure that it might be better today. This is maybe something from a few years ago, that speech to text model or systems, where they worked very well on American English spoken by white men with no background noise, but not so much so on any kind of any other population group or any other settings if there was background noise or multiple speakers. I'm assuming that also advanced a lot in the last few years, but and a similar thing happens for NLP. The text tools, they work very well for English, but not necessarily so for other languages. But that's something we could also discuss later when we talk about ethics and bias.
Yeah, for sure. So just on that discussion, I know you've brought up ChatGPT. I don't know, Mark or Terri, if you want to talk a little bit about ChatGPT versus Bard and this new Lambda.
Mark, do you want to take that
Sure,
one? And
I'll jump in on that one. So maybe before I touch on that, maybe just to expand on Vered's list of things that machine learning are doing right now. If you go to the bottom of your screen and click the show captions button, it'll show you a transcription of what we're talking about live. And so if you think about writing that traditionally with a computer, that'd be a very difficult program to write. But with machine learning, you've just taken tons of data of sound and what the transcribed versions are, which is very easy to get from like the UN or closed captioning for television or whatever. And they've built a system that learned how to do that. The other thing it kind of shows is that it's not perfect. So you'll see that it's often getting right what I say, but it'll often get it wrong too, especially if I use technical jargon or mumble, or if I had an accent or things as Vered says. Okay, so coming to ChatGPT is a very similar concept, is grabbing tons and tons of text, mostly off the web, and using that to build a system that tries to predict what you're going to say next, or what should be said next in a conversation. And so when you log on to ChatGPT or any of these other things like Lambda and Bard, they're all like fairly similar in terms of how they were built and how they work. And they all basically have the same issues too. You could basically are plopped in the middle of a conversation, you write things, and then it tries to predict what should happen next from its end of the conversation. And just like if you look at my captioning, you'll see at the bottom of the screen that it's not always perfect. ChatGPT doesn't always understand what's happening. It doesn't always fill in the right thing. It doesn't always know what to say. It doesn't understand context or that jargon should be used in a certain sentence or things like that.
Do you think that one is better than the other right now? Or is it, I mean, it's just in the test phase for Bard, and ChatGPT has been around, but not really. Do you have a preference? Is there a better way of kind of looking at it, or not really?
What's today is today Wednesday, then my answer is different than it was yesterday. You know, they're amazing in their speed. The thing I would actually like more than anything is to be in the rooms where each of the major players are deciding on a daily basis what features to roll out. Right.
Well, and that's an excellent point. So can you put some context about what that means to people in like the financial services industry, in the retail industry? I mean, there's social media and stuff, but you're going to make investments into things, and then you're going to have to, you know, we talked a little bit about it before, but the idea of training now, you know, it becomes, you've trained it and you've trained it and the model's gone.
Well,
so,
the model specific, I'm going to leave for my colleagues who actually do that kind of work. On the application side, I'll say that even though I know I have to redesign my courses for the fall, completely shift what is going to offer the folks in our MBA program the most value, because a lot of the things we might have been doing before are now trivial if they have these tools available. So I have to completely redo everything. But I'm not going to redo it yet, because if I redo it now, by the time July, August rolls around, it'll entirely be a different landscape. And so that is something that we all have to keep in mind, that just because we said this is a capability and we can use it, we may find that tomorrow we can't. When Microsoft stopped, and I haven't tried today to know if they changed it again, but over the last couple of days, they restricted the number of interactions you could have for any particular session from being what seemed to be fairly indefinite down to 5. Although I had a conversation, I want to say it was on Friday, where it told me that it didn't want to continue the conversation. So things.
Well, and that's an interesting discussion. We actually have a slide at the end talking about Sydney and the human element of these machines, I guess. I mean, it's hard to say, do they have personalities or not? And that's definitely a part of the discussion. I guess just kind of at this point, from a business standpoint, from a communicator who has to go and say, okay, company, I'd like you to invest this money, or I would not like you to, or policy that you have to make. How do you kind of go around the different changes and come up with an answer that is appropriate? I mean, do you say we're not going to use the tool because we don't know for sure and the information is not what we want it to be? Do you say we're going to limit it and you know, things like pricing, you know, are we going to eventually have prices attached to things that we've currently embedded in our system and suddenly find that there'll be costs?
I'll say that the human judgment is exactly where the human judgment needed to be before November. So as I think about how I'm going to use tools in class, I go back and I look at our academic integrity policy, and I draw from those foundational kind of guardrails that we use to make judgments before, and they're the same judgments we should make now. And, you know, just kind of continuing with that pricing example, we used spreadsheets before. Well, were those spreadsheets always perfect? Were they always completely up to date? You know, is the coding ideal? We had to have judgment to know if we should make decisions based on those. And so we better be sure that the thing we're doing is highlighting that the human judgment has to remain.
Yeah, just Mark and Fred, just as on that point, any
sorry,
comments?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on your question from earlier about which of these tools is better. I would like to argue that they're pretty much equivalent, and if they're not equivalent now, then each one of these big companies is just going to patch them until they're pretty much equivalent. So both of these examples that you gave, ChatGPT and Bard, they're both based on what Mark explained earlier, which is basically just training the model to predict the next word in the sentence. It's much like autocomplete on our phones. And it's trained on a huge text collection like the entire web. So it's really good at recognizing what is the most likely word to follow in a sentence. And so it seems like it understands language. And it's very impressive. I'm very often impressed by it. And it also learns a lot about world knowledge, not just about the language itself. It catches a lot of facts that appeared in the training corpus. And this is something that we've seen going on for the last 5 years since the first language model of that kind that was developed. But at the same time, they all suffer from a really major problem called hallucination, where they just make up information that is inaccurate or incorrect because they were only trained to produce text that looks human-like, or that the people would expect to see. And so there's no grounding in reality. And that's why, for example, when you use, if you use Bing that's enhanced with ChatGPT or Bard, they both have the same problem where you ask it a question and it answers a question, an answer that looks perfectly good. But if you actually know the answer, if you actually go back into the articles that it actually references as providing the evidence for the answer, you sometimes find that the facts are not in the article at all. It might be completely made up, or that they're distorted in some way, like numbers are changed. So that's a major issue for the applicability of these tools. And I don't see how any of the companies would solve that without completely changing the paradigm. So I find the tools are pretty much equally good and equally bad right now.
Can I just jump in? I'm not going to add to this. I completely agree with what Vered said, and almost in some sense, like from our point of view, ChatGPT isn't like it's sort of just the next step along the staircase that we've been watching happen for many years. It was done very publicly, whereas the previous steps were sort of celebrated by nerds in dark rooms type of things. But one thing I'd just like to expand on something that was implicit in what Terri said, just in case people aren't familiar with what people are using ChatGPT for. It's almost like it can do all of your homework for you, in the sense that if your homework involves looking stuff up on the web and summarizing what you find, and you can do your homework that way, ChatGPT can do your homework for you. And I think that's what Terri was getting at when she said that it's making you sort of rethink how you like teach courses, but also how you are going to run your business and things like that. When many of these things that we would normally get people to do can be very easily done by a computer in fractions of a second.
And I'll say even the things that might not have been as easy. So when I ask it to create a playbook that applies the concepts of design thinking, and to create that playbook with a professional set of outlines pitched to executives, it does a pretty fantastic job. And I assume it's because there are plenty of playbooks out there, and it can go and sort of figure out what apparently the good looking ones are and give that right back to me. So it's
and it can give it back to you in 100 languages.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for the comments on this particular topic. At this point, I'm going to check in with our audience and see if there's any questions or comments that have come forward from the audience. Okay, doesn't look like there is any at this point. So we'll move on to another very hot topic with a lot of sensitivity: ethics and privacy. I guess really I'll start off with a pretty basic question. ethical AI. What is it? From our panel, who would like to be the first to kind of jump in on that? What is ethical AI and how do you define it?
I would love to volunteer Terri to answer this question.
And
Terri?
I was going to say that, as I mentioned already, I go back to my academic integrity and talk about the human judgment. I have no expectation that the underlying models themselves have any kind of ethics other than what they might have found on the web, which should scare us all. And then the question I'd have for my colleagues with greater understanding of the technical side of this is what kind of filters are they able to lay on top such that what we see appears to be ethical?
That's a great question. Mark, Vered?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for Terry's question, but I can say that AI ethics is a very broad area of research. There are actually dedicated teams in the corporations like Google and Amazon working on this topic. So a few of the topics that are covered by AI ethics involve, for example, accountability. Well, actually, we're going to talk about accountability later, so maybe I'm not going to talk about that. But so one of the main issues, and that's where most of the work on this is all kinds of side effects of these algorithms. Like, for example, sometimes they somehow amplify societal biases. So, for example, you could train an algorithm to perform some task, and that involves information about a specific person, and it wouldn't perform as well for people from different population groups, just like the example that I gave earlier with the speech to text systems. Sometimes it learns to mimic the human biases that we have in our implicit biases that we have in our decision making. So AI ethics is concerned with both recognizing these issues, educating the researchers that maybe while we don't really have control or don't know how to prevent that, maybe we should avoid deploying AI in sensitive settings, like deciding on a sentence, like the result of sentencing somebody, or whether to give someone mortgage loan or something, and also working on ways to try to prevent that and try to make our systems more interpretable. Because one of the major issues with machine learning is that the model predicts something, but it is unable to explain its decision. So we just assumed that it was predicting something for the right reasons, but it may as well predict something based on some bias. Like, for example, there was actually a system a few years ago that was developed by Amazon to automatically filter out resumes. And I don't remember if they put it in production or not, but they tested it and they found out that it was discriminating against women. So that's something that shouldn't be taken into account. They should have that the model should have looked only at the work experience and credentials, but they actually showed that it was just focusing on that feature without being specifically trained to do that. It was just picking up on that bias. So that's among the questions in that area of research. But I think there's more questions than answers in this area right now.
You know, in doing the research, I noticed there was a position for an AI ethicist job. Now, what would that person do? I mean, are they the person that's going to kind of determine how information is being collected, how it's being stored, how it's being shared, and how it's going to be repurposed? Or who's going to make that kind of decision moving forward? I mean, there can be a lot of discussion, and it's no different if we're really talking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion in just general terms. But who makes that decision? Is it the programmer? Do they have to go through an AI ethicist? How does that happen?
All right, I'll take a swing at that one. And it's almost like it should be, just like all the other major decisions that we make in our organizations or even for ourselves in our work. And if you've ever had a chance to talk with me, one of the things I almost certainly would have said is that we have to think in 5T. And it's building off of 70 years of research around what we call socio-technical systems. And if you think that phrase is a little odd, you can see why I call it thinking in 5T. And so I say we take a target, we understand our times, so our context, and then we take, you can imagine these as being different dials. So I have the talent that I have available to me, either my own talent or the talent of the team, talent in the organization. I have the technology tools, whatever those might be, and I've got the techniques that the organization uses to do whatever it does. And you could see that you don't need to be talking about AI for that kind of a framework to make some sense. If I'm thinking about, do I need one really big shovel or lots of smaller shovels? You know, you could use the same kind of framework to make decisions about that. And so what organizations are doing, and some of them are doing it better than others, is they're saying, we think this is an important issue, AI ethics, we should deal with it starting now. And we're going to have a team of people who do that. And we're going to think about the kinds of skills that people should bring in. Should they be lawyers? Should they be philosophers? People with training in ethics? And then they put these teams together. And then sometimes in very public ways, they completely screw it up. And so you can read all sorts of news accounts about about Google and how their AI ethics team has been fraught and has, you know, people have been fired, people have left. And these are very difficult questions. And I'm sure in many of the cases, it happens at every stage. Like Vered was saying, how is the data collected? In the case of Amazon, if you take data that says, here are our top performers at Amazon, you don't have to use AI to end up making bad decisions based on the state. If your organization is already biased in some ways, and you could look at the board of directors and the senior officers of the company, and you could say, that doesn't look like the population in the area where they're serving their clients. But if what you do is say, how did those people get promoted? Well, what you may find is, not a lot of women got promoted. So the model, whether it's an artificially intelligent model or just some basic statistics, is probably going to end up predicting something that looks like the biased setting they already started with. And so if you're trying to make adjustments, you're going to have to do something different. And, you know, I'll leave it there, but think about all the decisions that organizations make, either well or not so well now, and we can just do it at scale with artificial intelligence, which is kind of the spooky thing about it for me.
Well, and thank you very much for Terri for that, because in our discussion, we actually have a slide to talk about a law, just a local law that's coming into effect in April in New York City, where they will have to audit all of the HR systems for both for hiring and for promoting people. So we'll table that point for a little bit, but definitely a very hot topic, and it'll be interesting to see what happens, because they'll be applying it to all the companies in New York City, and that's a lot of companies that affect places outside of New York City. So very interesting. On all of this information collecting, I guess the other part of that is privacy. And I mean, that's been an issue in the tech sector for a long time. How does that change within the AI context now? And I think we've kind of touched on it now, but can you kind of elaborate a little bit more? Like, do we even have privacy anymore?
Yeah, so I think this is something that many people are blissfully ignorant about, but I will mention how AI has made things a bit worse in a moment, but privacy has sort of gone out the window 20 years ago when we said it was okay for companies to give you this very, very long agreement that you have to click agree to before you use their software, that often gives up a lot of information that you wouldn't necessarily want to give up. And so people don't really know that everything you've typed into Google on your computer since you've had it, however long, is recorded somewhere. Like, you know, Facebook has your messages. They're doing data mining on you to try and like figure out what ads to sell, to show you, and so on. So in those ways, AI has not really made things worse. The thing that's made slightly worse is these language models that are trained on the entire internet. If you have your phone number and stuff on the internet, you can have some weird stuff happen. So you can ask these chatbots about specific people, and you can say like, ChatGPT, what do you know about me? And in some cases, there's filters to stop that from happening, but there's all these different chatbots and they don't all have the safety filters to prevent that from happening. And there's also people who may want to design chatbots that don't have those filters. And so one of the weird examples I saw today was someone asked ChatGPT about whatever it was, and then or asked, or maybe it was Bing's thing, for their phone number, and they just gave this random person's phone number. And this guy on Twitter was like, wait a minute, that's my phone number. Why is it giving out my phone number, telling people to call me? Like, I don't know. So that's the new thing, but yeah. Privacy. Oh, I mean, you have your Safeway card, and so like all your groceries are logged in a database, and that information might be sold to someone else who has another database that you're in that has like your medical information or something in there. Like it's really it's not good. I mean, the medical information less so in Canada, but you know, other databases you could potentially be hooked up to.
So from a technical perspective, how good is this information today? Like how well can it be data mined? I know I asked this question probably about 2 or 3 years ago, and the answer I got from the person that was talking was that it could take up to $1 million if they took all the information on a person's computer and tried to synthesize it. It would cost up to $1 million to kind of decipher it into things that could totally be used. And then he said it's only specific things. I mean, is that actually true? Or like, if they were to try to get a specific person's information rather than specific pieces of information, as you say, like through a Safeway card. Mark, can you kind of elaborate on that? Or
I mean, $1 million to get all the information off of someone's laptop is way too high. No, it's
no, to decipher it. Sorry, not to get it, to decipher it into things that you would like. Apparently this information is just all in data bits and isn't really that decipherable at this point, unless you're looking for very specific things.
So if you have your hard drive encrypted, you have a good chance. If you have your hard drive not encrypted and someone gets it, they're going to know a lot about you. A lot.
Okay.
Particularly if they can get into your password manager and log into all your websites and bank accounts and stuff like that.
Oh.
And it's not an expensive thing to do. It's not an expensive thing to do at all. I highly recommend you encrypt your laptops, or never lose them, or never, you know, make sure you have a firewall on your router so that people can't log in. Because if people want to mess with you, they very much can. And it does not cost anywhere close to $1 million with modern methods.
Now, just kind of elaborating on that point, you know, we will talk about this new law coming into New York, but this idea of, as you use your computer, as the AI starts to understand more of what you're doing on your computer. So I'm not just talking about like specific information that's being stored there, but in the interaction between the human and the computer. And as it starts to better understand you, like if it's able to recommend a person for a promotion, or be able to talk about performance reviews and things like that, that's a lot of what I would call private information that you might not have shared before.
I might just jump in on it. I don't have an answer for that exactly, but I just want to say it's not one AI. There's all these AIs that we have today are designed or are developed to perform very specific tasks. There are some tools that are based on AI that have been used for these kind of things. Like I just heard recently, actually, in BC, there was a story about some employer that was tracking the time that employees were working using some tool. I'm not sure it was actually using AI, but these kind of things need to be with the user's consent. And so it's not about the tool itself, it's more about who's using that and deploying it.
And then just, it's a huge topic. Final question on this point. Can we talk a little bit about the newest sort of technology about things like face recognition and what happens with that? Like you can walk into a shopping center and they can track you. And I mean, everybody's heard the stories of what they're apparently testing in China and things like that. How's that going to fit into it?
Have you flown out of YVR recently?
I have not. But
if you go through the, I know if you go through the Nexus lane headed to the US, it knows you as soon as you sort of step up to that kiosk. And I'll say it's fantastic because my fingerprints are almost non-existent. So I'm thrilled that they're using face recognition.
But can it be wrong? Like I've heard the opposite.
Right. Of course,
wrong.
If we go back, facial recognition, I don't believe it needed AI to run. You just needed a lot of data and a lot of computing power. Maybe it's faster now. But the large concern, and this is easily going back 10 years, was people take a bunch of pictures at an event. I mean, certainly the January 6th event, being able to identify the people in the crowd at the US Capitol, and then what happens with that data. I might be very happy that law enforcement is using that data in the US where there's some kinds of regulations there. But if we're talking about other kinds of groups being able to figure out who was at a protest, then no, but it goes back to what are the technology, what are the rules, the techniques, and what's the talent trying to get done? What's the target that they want? And what kind of a context are they trying to apply these tools in? So the tools are there, the tools are going to be there. I'm pretty strong in thinking about we need to work more on our human systems if we want to be effective in making judgments around the capabilities that the tools enable.
So if you put your future hats on, do you think it'll become more, we'll have more privacy protection, or will it just become that you have no privacy and that just becomes the ubiquitous position?
I think we're already there.
That privacy is no longer?
I think there have been efforts to push back on that. So, but we can't really expect those to necessarily come from Google and Facebook and so on. These really have to come from like government organizations and governments, some governments better than others, but governments don't have like the best track record of respecting privacy in the first place. But there are some successes, like particularly in Europe, they've sort of pushed back on Google and Facebook saying that like, no, you actually are not allowed to like store private information and not tell people what you're storing about them and so on. And so there is hope to go back. And there's also things like the right to be forgotten, where do you have the right to have information of you going off the internet after a while? Like if you committed a crime when you're a young teenager, should that information be on the internet forever? Or when you're like 40 years old and looking for a job, should that still be following you, type of thing? So there is still hope there. And I guess the other thing is, in these conversations, there's always this implicit thing of like, should we not build these things in the first place? But as Terri was sort of hinting, they're just so damn convenient in so many places. And it's just like you use the Safeway card to get the discount. Face recognition, I think, is in general like a net negative. I think it's a bad technology to build. But it's going to be used to, like, you know, you go to your phone and say, me grab all the pictures of me in 2007 where I'm smiling, and it just comes back and does it. Or like find all the pictures of my baby when it was 6 months old, or things like that. Like get me into the concert, like your Ticketmaster ticket will be tied to your face, and then you just like walk through the line and you don't scan the ticket anymore. It sees your face. Like all this will like can potentially happen, and people are going to love it. And it also comes with these like downsides that people don't think about, like loss of privacy and so on.
I want to add I want to add to both what Terri and Mark said. I agree with everything. To the 2 points that I wanted to add to, one of them is the convenience. I agree with that. I think it goes beyond that. I think it's almost impossible to prevent that now for an individual who's not willing to have their data exposed. I think I don't know, I think just having like a smartphone already, like there's almost nothing, you would have some data on you in the hands of these companies, and trying to prevent that, you would have to be very aware, and it would make your life very uncomfortable because everything is progressing towards using these technologies. So that's for that point. The other point was about I think it is naive to talk about maybe we shouldn't develop these tools or these technologies, and there will always be bad players, but these technologies also have good usages. I think probably in the long term we need to regulate it, but one of the problems is that the regulation and governments is a lot slower than the pace of developing these tools and deploying them, which is currently happening.
Thank you very much again to
before we move on, can I just comment on Scott's question from the chat, just because I think this is a common concern. So Scott is just asking about you know, how OpenAI with ChatGPT maybe did a better job than Microsoft did at not having the thing like show emotions and get mad at you and so on. And I think that's true. On the other hand, like we tend to ascribe like, anthropomorphic type of like human type of features to these things. And it's really convincing when they're talking to you. But I think Vered made a very good analogy where this is kind of like an autocomplete that can access the whole internet to try and complete things. And so in some sense, it can access like very hateful, angry things that have been written on the internet. If you take it down that road and you get to the right place, it will, even with ChatGPT, I'm sure if you interact with it enough, you can get to say some pretty awful things. On the other hand, like at the end of the day, it's still just autocomplete. And so like we don't really get annoyed that if autocomplete suggests like emotional words or something like that.
Interesting. Thank you. Just on that point, does anyone in the audience also have any questions or any comments at this point in time?
There's another comment in the chat about if the language from Yvonne. If the language learning is pulling things from large sources of data, should it cite its references? I can take that question. I think it should. So depending on the application. So definitely for something like a search engine like Bing, they were actually trying to do that. It does cite its references. One of the problems is that because of its generative nature, that it just generates text, then it might actually provide references that don't actually support the answers that the chatbot generates. And one of the problem with this whole technology of language models is that it's just trained on a huge text collection with no notion of author or time or source, also including the problem that some sources are more reliable than others. Like, for example, you would want it to repeat information that it read on Wikipedia, but maybe not information that it read on some forum that is full of hate speech or something like that. And right now it's just treating all these texts equally. And so that's definitely a problem. And I think that for the application of search engines like Bing, that the main idea of being able to answer complex queries that would be difficult and require multiple queries and merging different documents and reading a lot of text if done manually by the users. I think that's a really good idea, but they would have to work on maybe limiting some of its freedom in text generation and just finding the most relevant passages and gluing them together and maybe providing the complete passages from which it retrieves the answer. And that would be a lot more reliable and a lot more useful, I think, for people.
Are there any more questions from the audience at this point, or?
I could ask one. Laura, do you prefer they're in the chat?
You can put them in the chat, or you can ask yourself. Go for it.
I'm just curious, Mark, because you were commenting on what Scott mentioned above, and I'm just wondering, because of what you said and how the tools can be perceived to be sentient or have some of these qualities, I'm wondering if the panel has any concerns about everyone being able to access this. It's just accessible, you can register for it, but it's pretty easy for anyone to get access to it. So I'm just wondering if that's a concern.
There's too much money to be made by not giving everyone access to, by like giving people access to it, that everyone is going to have access to something like this within 5 years, no doubt.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And I'm a little more worried about not allowing everyone to have access. If we, I tend to go back to the 80s when we first had personal computers coming online, and the dramatic benefits as well as, fart apps. There's a downside too of, letting everybody write code. On the other hand, we get what we have today because everyone grew up with, or many people grew up with that kind of access to basic computing capabilities. And I would not want to say some people have access and some people don't, because I don't think this group would be very happy with who would end up with the access.
Well, and that's an excellent segue kind of to our next discussion as well, is we're going to be talking about crafting your work and expertise. And there's a lot of different tools out there. But just kind of on this whole concept of access, I'm not sure if people have heard, but I think it was Sunday night, Meta has announced that they're going to be introducing an actual subscription service to some of their products. And it's something like $11 or $12 a month. So, when we're thinking about some of the tools that are out there, and some of them are great, this whole concept of, is it a good idea to have a subscription? Is it a good idea to say that the information belongs to a certain membership? Just for discussion there, this whole concept of subscription, I think, is going to come out a lot. I think that, Elon Musk has suggested it for Twitter as well. So, comments?
Right. I'll take another swing. I am very careful in class, and I have, working professionals are most of the students in my courses, to be sure if I'm suggesting a tool, that tool has some kind of a free access to it. So I might suggest that students use Grammarly, because I know that there's a free version of Grammarly. If Grammarly were to take away the free version, then I would have to go lobby the organization and say, we have to get a site license for this tool, or something similar to it. So Grammarly is one of the best at proofreading information. And I want everyone to have that capability. I wouldn't want some people who have, access to more resources to be able to have a more finely crafted document than those who didn't. So I think that's just going to have to be part of our conversation. I don't love it when I look at my credit card receipt and I see all the different things I subscribe to. I have a paid version of Grammarly, a paid version of Write-Sonic, and that's just two of them, So am I going to have to cut back on my cable subscriptions so that I can have more AI subscriptions? Things.
Well, and that's an interesting point too. And Amazon and certainly Netflix and Roku and some of the other streaming services, they're all looking at the idea of having a free or a limited version that's done through advertising. And then you bring back this idea of privacy. Like one of them is going to target you with advertising information. The other one's not. The other issue that comes up there is one of them may not target you with the advertising, but they may be collecting you and your information in different places and repackaging it as well. So it brings up a lot of discussion.
If you're not paying for a product, then you are the product.
That's a great statement. That's a great statement. So back to kind of crafting your work and the expertise that's involved. With all these new tools that are out there, and I'm just gonna pick a couple for now to talk about, and then we will have some time in the discussion to talk about them further. But let's say we talk about like ChatGPT, Bard, Imagine, DALL-E. With those tools out there, how has the whole concept of crafting your work and being an expert, how has it changed, or has it? Mark, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
You can generate such cool art with DALL-E and Imogen and all these sorts of things. It's really amazing. I mean, it's in some ways like if you're a professional artist, it might be slightly terrifying because it can do your job in a fraction of a second. On the other hand, you know, there is more to your job than just being able to draw a picture. It's about like designing things that people like and make them have feelings and so on. And your job is to push it further. But on the other hand, it's like democratizing where me, who has like no artistic talent at all, can generate like really cool images that I think would be neat to look at or to put on my website or whatever. So I think it is in some sense, it's slightly terrifying for professionals, but a lot of the professionals I've talked to, it's more like once you explain to them what's going on, they're like, oh, this is actually make my job a lot more efficient and easier. And then in other cases, it sort of lets people who don't have specialized expertise do things like you can, if you're afraid to go to talk to your doctor, or if like in Canada, we have major problems with going to your doctor, you can technically ask ChatGPT and Bard or whatever about your health issues. Vered says no, but
You can. I don't think it's a good idea.
it will get there though.
That I would still recommend go with the findings to a real doctor and consult with them later.
Yes, I agree. I'm saying if there are people in Canada who literally have no access to a doctor. You would have to drive 6 hours to access the nearest doctor. And like, you know, it's not perfect, but we'll get there. I really think we will. One of my colleagues was just driving around rural Saskatchewan into the communities and putting x-ray machines in these communities that are just connected to the web by like cloud, like not like sky computing, like satellite internet. And these communities have never had x-rays before. And now they can get like radiologist assessments. And part of the reason they can do that is because the AI makes the radiology assessment so much faster. It's still assessed by a real radiologist. It's just a lot faster. And these are people that have never had x-rays before, and they have TB in their communities. And this is like a big deal to them.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in because I think Mark and Vered were exactly going after something I find to be one of the most important things for us to be doing, is to think about where these tools sit in a workflow. It isn't that there's just this chat bot that we can all pull up and play with, or we can do some interesting art, but where does it fit in our workflows? So there's been research, the medical community has been using AI for quite a long time, and very narrowly defined tasks, so they want to train it on finding a particular kind of cancer or looking at a particular kind of x-ray, and they get some pretty amazing results. And so one of the findings they have is around counseling and people's willingness to open up either more quickly or in greater depth when they're with that chat bot than they are if they're online with an actual human. And maybe they've also looked at it, are we better off if we're on Zoom without the video or with the video? Where do people actually open up more effectively? And all of that research is going on. And that then helps us think about the workflows that make sense. So does someone start with the AI, but the AI is tied into your healthcare system? And then the healthcare system is, looking for certain signals that now it's time for the human to come into play. Same kinds of things with the chatbots and the questions we had about references. In December, I was getting quite frustrated because the chatbots would give me a URL and I would click on the URL and it would just be made up. Vered was saying it just is sort of guessing at what might come next. And my concern or my question was, it's not that hard that you would have some second layer in there that would just say, and I'm going to click on that URL. And if it comes back with what we all know is a 404 error, then I'm not going to print that on your screen. Just say, I don't know. And just in the last 2 weeks, I've seen all the different tools dramatically shifting how they're handling what data they're accessing and whether or not there are these kind of what I call double loops. So it does its, AI prediction, and then it does something else that actually tests it back against some piece of reality. And that's what I want to see more of. And that's what all of us can contribute to, is to be thinking about what in your work. I do a lot of thinking about the bottom-up applications of AI. So tools that all of us can use, like these chatbots, versus tools that have to be trained on company proprietary data. So that would be top-down AI. So how do we craft our work such that we make the best use of these tools, even if it's something as simple as just using Grammarly to look at our emails as we're typing them, such that we get benefit. And, so a couple of things are, what are the tools that are out there that might be most helpful to you in your work? And I'll share a link on that, but also where in your work would you like to offload to a tool like some of the ones that are being developed?
Yeah, I think there's the whole concept of augmented work and who's going to do what. Yeah. Now, I noticed Jose's brought to my attention, we're kind of pushing the time limits. And so maybe we can just check in quickly with the audience if they've got any more questions. And if not, go on to our next topic. It doesn't look like there's any questions right now. So the next topic.
Sorry, I think there's one question about just ownership.
Oh, okay.
And this is actually being challenged in courts right now in California. There's a class action lawsuit against a system called Copilot, which helps you write code, which will actually spit out copyright, proprietary, like non-open source code or code that needs to be licensed. And so there's a big class action lawsuit against this. Dolly's a little bit more tricky because if you exactly copy an artist, that's blatant copyright theft. If you copy an artist's style, it's not clear that that's a court case you can win. And so, yeah, and then it's a matter of like, do you own what's generated by Dolly? I think it depends on which system. In some of these systems, they say that you actually have the copyright of the images, and some of them they say you don't have the copyright of the images of the things you generate.
That's interesting. We actually have in the discussion, we have a video that we can talk about that actually brings a lot of that up in terms of creative rights and who has what and where. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to get to that as well.
Laura, we have a question here from Katrina. Katrina.
Hi, if I can jump on the video here. This is a little bit off Chat GPT, but I just wanted to hear if there was a tool that I might use in my workplace. So I work in seniors living, and something like Chat GPT I could see being most beneficial in terms of writing blog articles and things like that. But in our context, working with seniors, we do a lot of storytelling and interviewing our residents. And I'm just curious if this panel knows of a tool where I can take interview notes, drop it into some kind of technology that spits out a bit of a finessed draft for me to work off of. I could see there being privacy concerns if you're dropping data about residents into this technology. So that's interesting, but I just was curious if the panel knew of anything like that.
ChatGPT does that.
It does?
Yeah, you could interact with it. You could give it instructions. You could interact with it. You could see the output and further refine it. But again, like with the caveat that it could always introduce some factual inconsistencies. But you could provide it pretty just like bullets of the information that you want to include and ask it to write a story about it, and it does that, and then refine it in an interaction with it.
I was unaware of that. Thank you.
We also have a question here from Martin. Martin, would you like me to read it out loud?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so from Martin, I think AI has a PR problem. On one hand, it's described as just a glorified autocorrect, while on the other, it's dubbed as a way to save us from demeaning jobs. How do you resolve this dichotomy?
Well, thank you for that, Martin, because that actually leads us right into our next kind of discussion on hype and snake oil salesmen and fakes. So maybe, Mark, do you want to kind of take that to kind of the next set of discussions?
Sure. I mean, the thing is the AI community used to be fairly small and now it is just absolutely enormous. So unfortunately, there's no one central source of PR. So I don't think this is going to be corrected, but I think like the glorified autocorrect helping you with demeaning jobs is like those that's not necessarily a false dichotomy, in the sense that if you think of like using calculators instead of using your head or an abacus, or using Excel instead of like a manual like accounting sheet or something like that, these are all tools that like help us do jobs more easily. And things like language models and art generation programs and stuff like that, they're going to make us do things we haven't thought about doing before. But at the same time, like Excel and like not Excel, there were many spreadsheet programs before that, but spreadsheet programs came along, and that was really a game changer. You could have a spreadsheet that's automatically calculating all of your stuff for you, and that was great.
So when you use the term snake oil salesman, what are you kind of referring to in that term? Is it kind of an intent to intentionally mislead?
Yes. So, well, you can be a snake oil salesman without knowing it. But the more dangerous one is the snake oil salesman who knows they're a snake oil salesman. So one of the problems is like something like ChatGPT almost looks like magic. And so you can imagine forming a company and selling a product that says it solves a certain thing. And if you're selling it to an audience that's not savvy and they don't know the thing that Verit has really emphasized here, that hallucinates information, you might get people or governments to buy and spend a lot of money on things that fundamentally don't do what they're promising to do, or even worse, they are actively harmful to the people using them, or ultimately the people affected by these products.
So is there a way of knowing for sure? I mean, again, we're going to talk about that in accountability, but I think we've gotten there to that part of the discussion. I mean, when you get an answer from a computer, a lot of times you believe that answer to be correct. And so particularly if it's been packaged in a way with a brand that you might want to believe in, how can you tell? Right? I mean, there's some things you know the answer to, but if you don't know, what do you do?
That's a very good question, because I think one of the problems with these language models is that they're very eloquent and they're very confident about their answers, even if the answers are just completely made up. So it could really be confusing. And even for me, when I play around with ChatGPT and I ask it a question about something that I'm not an expert of, I would tend to believe the answer. The only way I can actually verify it is to go and look or search on Google all the specific facts that it generated and find evidence to all of them. So yeah, it comes with this risk.
Not to kind of belabor the point there, but during the launch of Bard, Bard made a boo-boo. And Bard was supposed to be the expert, and I think that's really kind of put that discussion on the table as to where that's going to go. And again, I mean, so you yourself said you'd go to Google, and so many people would go to Google, and now suddenly Google made a mistake.
So I'm talking about two different things. So Bard is also a language model on top of the data. It's a language model basically. And what I was referring to is actually Googling the answer, where you can actually find the article on the web. I'm not saying that everything on the web is right, but that's another topic. But you could actually find the evidence instead of relying on what was generated by the language model. And it is true that Google made a factual error in the Bard demo, but by the way, also Bing also made several factual errors in the demo. It was just for some reason went unnoticed for a few days until somebody wrote a blog post on it. But these models, they make the exact same mistakes. And I think it's actually a positive thing that now all these people have access to it, so that you can see how on the one hand, it's amazing that it can perform all these very complex queries. And on the other hand, everybody can now see all these limitations of these models.
So I guess kind of moving on to the next part of that topic is fakes. And we've kind of touched on part of what is fake, and that's to do with the rights. And then the other is deep fake. And Mark, can you kind of chat a little bit about that? Do you want us to play that clip you sent earlier today now, or hold off, or?
Sure. Why don't you play it?
Okay. Jose, can you play the clip?
Coming right up.
And I think just if you can talk about fakes right now, kind of what deep fake is, and
fundamental issue is if you think about it, it's not just language we can do autocomplete on, it's images and videos and stuff like that. And this stuff is getting better all the time. And so it's this fundamental question of what sources of information do you trust, because everything can be fake. And we already have lots of fake news articles in the world, but the fact that you'll see fake videos of people, of celebrities and politicians saying things is a little bit scary.
Well, it's interesting how as we look at this clip, it's going to be interesting what they've actually done there.
Their ability to.
Hope your internet is good, people.
It got me thinking about my full-time employees and their ability to survive on $8 an hour in New York City. And foremost in all of our minds has been the loss and the grief felt by the people of Orlando. Most of us don't get our healthcare through the marketplace. We get it through our job or through Medicare or Medicare. And what you should know is that thanks to the Affordable Care Act, your coverage is better today than it was before. Women can get free checkups, and you can't get charged more just for being a woman. To give his employees come together to pass a common bill that would boost America's very, very hard times.
Some progress, at least within the small confines of the legal community. I think it's real important.
Here we go. President Barack Obama, when you're giving a speech, make sure you use a lot of pauses.
America's businesses have created 14.5 million new jobs over 75 straight months.
We're developing technology. Every technology can be used in some negative way, and so we all should work towards making sure that it's not going to happen. And even one of the interesting directions is that once you know how to create something, you know how to reverse engineer it. And so you can, and so one could create methods for identifying edited videos versus real videos.
And so the thing that worries me is actually not just the fake news thing. We've already got lots of fake and misleading news. The thing that bothers me is you get these phone calls all the time saying they're from the CRA or whatever and trying to scam you out of money. What happens when those phone calls sound like your mom's voice? Or what happens when you get on a FaceTime call from a random number and your partner is on there speaking in their voice and it's their face and it looks like it's in your house and they're asking you need to urgently send money for whatever. Like, I don't know if if we can't even deal with the scam robocall thing, how are we going to deal with all of these things? So that's something that definitely worries me a lot.
Yeah, we have another clip. I don't think we have time to look at it tonight, but there's even websites now that you can have AI in certain voices created for you. The knowing again that these tools are out there, what do you do? Like, how do you protect yourself? I mean, technically everybody on this call could find themselves in a situation where their face could be dubbed or their voice could be dubbed. Like, do you never go on it? Is there something you can do? Like, is there some way of putting, there used to be watermarks. Can you put a watermark in your video? I don't know, like, if you guys know, but technically, I mean, is there some way of protecting?
Watermarking is easy. The more challenging problem is recognizing something that is fake. And there've been a lot of news articles over the last 2 months saying, someone built a system that recognizes stuff that was generated by ChatGPT, and that's cool, but you can just get around that in 1 day. So this is all that itself is like fake news. You can develop systems that are going to be robust against future things. So watermarking is easy. That's actually pretty easy to do. The trick is when people don't want you to know that it's fake. That's going to be the challenging thing going forward.
Maybe I'll add to what Mark just said. It's as simple as changing the language model, like changing ChatGPT so that it doesn't generate specific words. And then if the text contains specific words, then it's predicted to be written by a human. So it's as simple as a student who wants to use that for their homework would just use ChatGPT and then edit it slightly to add these words if they know the list of words. So it's really easy to hack these tools right now.
Interesting. Well, I guess maybe we'll just, in the interest of time, we've only got a few more minutes. So I'm going to just move on to the accountability and human versus machine discussion, and then we can take all of the questions at the end from there. Again, I mean, this is such a huge topic. We've just begun to kind of talk on it already, but for many people, the idea that the computer could be wrong was startling when some of these things started to come out. And I guess I have to kind of ask the question again, what do we do about it? Like, I know Reggie kind of answered and said, well, you got to go to Google. So if Bart is wrong, you got to go to Google. But what if you don't know? And at what point, who's accountable for what? I know I've heard about something called like the Turing test. And do we at some point say, we are going to ascribe human value to that computer and it's going to be right? Are we at some kind of a point like that?
I might just refer to the Turing test. I think it's no longer a good test. It's probably hasn't been a good test for many years now, because the Turing test just tests whether a human judge conversing with a software, like with a chatbot, for example, would be able to recognize that they're talking to a software or think that they're talking to another human. And I think it's very likely that ChatGPT would, or I don't know, maybe it has been tested even, that people would think they're conversing with a human, especially when it's a short conversation. If it goes on, it increases the chances that it would say something that would flag it as language model generated. But especially for short conversations, there's no reason to suspect. It's so fluent, it's so human-like. And especially if you ask it about things you don't really know, you're not an expert of, you might not even notice any kind of inconsistencies. So yeah, I don't think the Turing test would, I don't think it's very relevant anymore.
Interesting. So
jump in on that question a bit. I think like doing stuff like this is important, and writing articles that are not saying like, oh, I chatted with the Bing thing and it said some really mean stuff or something like that. Like, you can do that, but I think educating the public that these are really just bullshit generators, and recognizing that they're an amazing tool, but they also have these major limitations. And it's not a complicated limitation. The limitation is it sometimes just makes stuff up. and it doesn't understand like the world at all. I think just teaching people that these are the main limitations of the method, I think goes a long way in creating some like skepticism of some of the downsides here. Just like you learn that like those text messages from random numbers that seem to say that like, oh, you know, did you get the money or whatever, you learn pretty quickly that that's just like BS. You're gonna have to learn like a new set of skills to recognize when you're being sort of trying to be taken advantage of by a chatbot or something.
Thank you. I think just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask one final question that kind of, I think, sums stuff up, and that's about augmented humanity and kind of bringing this whole concept of the human and the machine. And I'm going to read just a very short quote from Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google. Augmented humanity is about computers helping us with tasks we are not very good at, and us helping computers with tasks they are not very good at. Just in kind of thinking that was from a couple of years ago. Where are we on that whole AI S-curve? And I know out at Davos this year, Satya Nadella said, yes, we're there. You know, we're starting to go into the golden age of AI. Can we just in closing kind of say, where do you guys see this going?
I'm going to circle right back to how do I choose to use these tools in my work? And am I making good choices about that? And am I making building workflows? You know, that's going to be my word for the day. Building workflows that make the work I need to do both better in terms of the higher level work that I try and get done, and also that offloads the work that I might have had to hire, you know, an army of RAs to do. Now, instead of the RAs entering zeros and ones like I did as an undergraduate, instead they get to actually participate in the analysis and the research planning. Yeah. But it's going to be about the workflows and making good choices, being aware of the tools that are helpful. So being at a professional association where you can then share, I found this tool and it helped me proofread, or it helped me create new copy, or it helped me do these things, or this other one was terrible. And sharing amongst professionals to figure out what the new great workflows are going to be is where I would be spending my time.
Interesting. Yep, for sure. Mark?
Well, I mean, in terms of augmented humanity, I mean, it's kind of an ironic thing. We all have these things. I mean, we don't all do, but many of us have these things in our pocket that help us do an amazing number of things we wouldn't be able to do on our own. And similarly, I'm talking to you on this computer thing, using the internet to do things that we absolutely would not be able to have a conversation with people in all parts of BC without computers helping us out with that. So I think this is just an extension of a long trend that humanity has been doing for many, many centuries of trying to use tools to help us do stuff more effectively. I know it seems like with ChatGPT that all over the news and things like that, 100 million users, that this is a massive, massive change. It may not change your day-to-day life as much as you really think it does. Progress in AI is going fast, but it's not like crazy, crazy fast. You will adapt. It's not as scary as people make it out to be.
And Fred?
I like this quote because I think that still today humans and machines are good at different things. We are much better at reasoning and much better at reading between the lines and generalizing from our prior experience and common sense knowledge. And AIs are better at recognizing patterns in the data, especially things that are tedious that maybe we're not good at seeing the small details, but AIs are really good at this. So I think that, yeah, we definitely, I think that's a very optimistic way and a very realistic way to look at AI as a collection of tools to enhance our performance and make our lives easier, and not as anything threatening or anything that is going to replace us in any way.
And the idea of it being an interrelationship.
The idea of what, sorry?
Of it being an interrelationship. So there's a responsibility on the human to work with the AI too. And I mean,
Yeah.
the example being, even the Sydney thing that's out there right now and how it responded.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to educate the users when now, especially it's becoming more broadly deployed and available to everyone. I think it's really important to educate people about how it works, what are the things you can do with it, what are the limitations, and then also some of the ethics around using it. And there's still a lot of questions in that area. So these are things that we should continue to study, or the researchers working on ethics should continue to study and figure out all the accountability issue, like who's responsible for the output of the model. Can you, I don't know, if you decide to use ChatGPT for medical advice and it provides a really bad medical advice and you get hurt, who's responsible for that?
That's a very tough question. Well, thank you, Terri, Mark, Red, everybody in the audience. Thank you very much for being here. I am going to open it up for questions. I guess before I do that, Terri, one of the things we didn't get to talk about, but if you don't mind, kind of while we're going through the chat, to just put in a link. Terri Griffith has a really great page on her blog that lists like about 180 different AI tools that you can use, and it's an interactive pivot table. Would you mind if you shared that in the chat, or if we can share that in the chat? Sorry, you're muted, Terri.
I had shared it earlier, but I'll stick it down here at the bottom as well.
That would be much appreciated. I think it'd be a lot of interest to the folks in the audience. And on that note, if anybody has any questions or comments, can you let us know now? Jose, are we good? Are there people still asking questions?
I think we're good. We have people sort of congratulating in the chat, and I know that we're at time, so we should probably wrap things up. So thank you to our generous panelists, Laura, for moderating the discussion. That was fabulous. Also, a thank you to our two event managers, Mandy and Mona, for all their hard work this evening, pulling everything together. And Jose, our current past president, for his help behind the scenes, and especially to our attendees tonight. Thanks for your enthusiasm and excellent sort of questions and engagement. So anyway, we hope to see you again in the future, and otherwise have an excellent evening, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone, and good night.